Growing up in my family gives you a certain sense of history. I'm simply the latest in a line that can be traced back generations. Over my grandmother's lifetime, the last 90 years or so.
What if everything you thought you knew about royal unity was just a carefully staged illusion? What if behind those polished smiles, behind those perfectly timed balcony waves, there was a silent war brewing, one so personal, so deeply rooted in betrayal that even mentioning the name involved could send shockwaves through the palace corridors? Because right now, something is shifting, something calculated, something that feels less like reconciliation and more like a power move. And at the center of it all, Laura Lopes, a name barely whispered in royal conversations until now. Let's be honest, most people don't even know she exists, and maybe that's exactly how it was meant to be. Laura Lopes, the daughter of Queen Camilla, has lived in the shadows of the most scrutinized family on earth. While the world fixated on the chaos between Prince William and Prince Harry, another story, quieter, colder, and arguably more explosive, was unfolding behind closed doors. A stepsister, a fractured bond, a history drenched in resentment so raw it could barely be contained. And now, that same relationship is suddenly being pulled back into the spotlight. Not by accident. Never by accident. Think about it. Laura wasn't raised in the palace spotlight. She built her life quietly. Art galleries, private ventures, a carefully curated existence far from royal drama. But no matter how far she stayed from the crown, she could never escape what her mother represented. Because to William, Camilla wasn't just his father's wife. She was the woman linked to his mother's heartbreak. And Laura, she wasn't just an innocent bystander. She was the other side of that story. The daughter defending her own mother's truth. Two worlds, two loyalties, colliding. And when they collided, it wasn't polite. It wasn't civil. It was explosive. Reports didn't describe disagreements, they described fights. Emotional, sharp, unforgiving clashes where blame wasn't just thrown, it was weaponized. Imagine that tension. A grieving son holding on to his mother's pain. A daughter refusing to let her mother be painted as the villain. Every conversation, a battlefield. Every silence loaded with things left unsaid. But here's where it gets interesting, because despite all of that history, despite the anger, the accusations, the unresolved wounds, something didn't completely break. There were cracks, yes, deep ones, but not a full collapse, because slowly, almost quietly, signs started appearing. Small gestures, subtle inclusions, moments that didn't make headlines but spoke volumes if you were paying attention. William showing up at Laura's wedding, not just attending, but standing there, present, visible. That wasn't obligation, that was something else, something more complicated. And then, years later, another move, far more symbolic. Laura's daughter, Eliza, stepping into one of the most watched events in the world, walking as a bridesmaid at William's own wedding. That wasn't random, that wasn't coincidence, that was a signal. A controlled, deliberate message to anyone watching closely enough. The door wasn't completely closed. But here's the thing about royal gestures, they're never just emotional. They're strategic. Always. And that's where the tension starts building again. Because fast forward to now, and suddenly Laura Lopes isn't just a forgotten name in the background, she's being seen, included, invited into spaces that are carefully controlled, carefully curated, spaces like Sandringham. And if you understand royal traditions, you already know that guest list isn't casual. It's a statement, a hierarchy, a silent ranking of who matters and who doesn't. So when Laura's name appears there, it doesn't just raise eyebrows, it sends a message, loud, clear, and slightly unsettling. Because at the same time, others are missing. Others have been pushed out, quietly removed, distanced. And yet here is Laura stepping back in. After everything. After all that history. After all that tension. So the question isn't just why, the real question is why now? Because this doesn't feel like forgiveness alone. It feels time. It feels calculated. It feels like something bigger is unfolding beneath the surface. And if you look closely, really closely, you start to see a pattern, a reshaping, a repositioning, not just of relationships, but of power itself. And William, he's right at the center of it. Not reacting, not following, but moving carefully, quietly, decisively. And the palace? It's not just watching, it's bracing. Because when old wounds suddenly turn into new alliances, it usually means one thing. The real story hasn't even started yet. And this is where everything starts to feel different. Because what looks like a quiet family reconciliation on the surface begins to reveal something far more controlled underneath. This isn't just about healing old wounds. This is about positioning, about drawing new lines in a family that has been defined for decades by fractures, scandals, scandals and carefully managed appearances. And right now, all eyes, both inside and outside the palace, are locked onto one question. What exactly is Prince William doing? Because insiders aren't calling it a coincidence, they're calling it his move, not a reaction. Not a gesture of kindness, a move. The kind of word that makes you pause because it suggests intent, strategy, planning. And when that word starts circulating in royal circles, it usually means decisions are being made long before the public ever notices. Look at the timing. The monarchy is under pressure. King Charles facing health challenges. Catherine stepping back after her own battle. The institution itself walking a tightrope between tradition and survival. And in the middle of all this uncertainty, William isn't stepping back. He's stepping forward, quietly taking control of the narrative, quietly shaping what the future will look like on his terms. And suddenly, Laura Lopes is part of that future. Think about the symbolism of that for a second. This is the same Laura who once stood on the opposite side of one of the most emotionally charged divides in royal history. The same Laura whose very presence used to ignite tension. And now, she's not just being tolerated, she's being included. That shift alone is enough to make palace insiders uneasy, because it challenges everything people thought they knew about William. For years, he's been painted as controlled, disciplined, even cold when it comes to family matters. Someone who doesn't forget easily. Someone who doesn't forgive quickly. So when he suddenly extends what looks like acceptance toward Laura, it doesn't just raise eyebrows, it creates suspicion. Because people inside the palace are asking themselves the same thing. If he can change his stance on something this personal, what else is he capable of changing? And that's where the real tension begins to build. Because this isn't happening in isolation. Behind the scenes, there are whispers, quiet, cautious, but persistent, about a growing divide between William and Charles. Not explosive, not public, but real. Subtle disagreements about how the monarchy should evolve, about who should have influence, about how much control should be held and by whom. Charles, emotional, traditional, deeply tied to the past. William, strategic, forward-looking, focused on survival over sentiment. Two different visions, one crown. And Laura Lopes? Somehow, she's now sitting right at the intersection of those visions. Because there's another layer to this, one that doesn't get talked about openly, but everyone in those circles understands. Camilla, her position, her influence, and the quiet expectation that William, when the time comes, will allow her space to define her role without interference. That's not just a personal promise, that's a political one. And by extension, it directly affects Laura. Because if Camilla remains secure, respected, and integrated, then so does her family. And suddenly, William's decision to include Laura starts to look less like forgiveness and more like alignment. A strategic alignment that stabilizes one part of the royal structure while he reshapes the rest. It's not emotional, it's architectural. And that's exactly why it's making people uncomfortable. Because this version of William, the one who can compartmentalize past pain, who can override personal history for a larger objective, isn't the version the palace is used to. This is someone more controlled than ever, more decisive, someone who isn't trying to win approval but is quietly consolidating influence. There's a reason some insiders have started using words like ruthless in hushed tones, not because of cruelty, but because of clarity, because he knows exactly what needs to stay and what needs to go. And look at the pattern. Harry and Meghan distanced, Andrew removed, others quietly sidelined. And yet Laura Lopes, once part of the most painful chapter, is being brought closer. That contrast isn't accidental. It's a filter, a test of loyalty, discretion, and alignment with the future William is building. Because this isn't about popularity. It's about control, about shaping a monarchy that can survive not just public scrutiny, but internal instability. And here's where it gets even more unsettling. Because while all of this is happening, it's happening quietly. No grand announcements, no official declarations, just subtle shifts. Invitations extended, appearances made, decisions hinted at but never fully explained. And that silence, it's not empty, it's deliberate. Because in the royal world, what isn't said often matters more than what is. And the palace staff, they see it. They remember the past. They remember the arguments, the tension, the fractures that once defined William and Laura's relationship. So when they see them now, sharing space, sharing moments, existing without visible conflict, it doesn't feel simple. It feels orchestrated, controlled, like something has been carefully recalibrated behind the scenes. So what does this mean for the future? It means the monarchy is changing, not loudly, not dramatically, but fundamentally. William isn't waiting for the crown to start shaping it. He's already doing it, piece by piece, relationship by relationship, decision by decision. And Laura Lopes is just one piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that's still being assembled. Because here's the truth no one is saying out loud. When someone who was once part of the conflict suddenly becomes part of the structure, it usually means the rules of the game have changed. And if the rules have changed, then so has the outcome. So the real question isn't whether William and Laura have truly moved past their history. The real question is, what role is she about to play next? Because whatever this is, whatever this shift represents, it doesn't feel finished. It feels like the beginning of something much bigger. And somewhere inside those palace walls, people are starting to realize this story is far from over.